The heat was a physical thing, a weight that pressed down from a sky the color of faded denim. It baked the red dust of the Jornada del Muerto into a fine powder that coated everything, clinging to the sweat on Maeve O'Rourke's brow and settling in the creases of her worn blue dress. For 3 days, the stagecoach had been a rolling oven, and inside, the world had shrunk to the rhythmic creak of leather, the jingle of the harness, and the steady, small warmth of her son, Finn, asleep against her side. He stirred now, his 6-year-old body resilient even in this oppressive climate. His fingers were curled tight around the brass whistle that hung from a leather thong around his neck, a talisman from a life that already felt a lifetime away. Maeve gently brushed a stray lock of sandy hair from his forehead. He had his father's hair, but her eyes, a deep and watchful green, eyes that saw too much. Outside, the landscape was relentless, a panorama of cracked earth, skeletal mesquite trees, and the shimmering distortion of air rising from the ground. Then, a change. A collection of low, sun-bleached buildings materialized through the haze, crouched along a sluggish ribbon of a creek. A crooked sign announced Mesquite Crossing, home, or so she prayed. As if to welcome them, the wind picked up. It started as a whisper, a sigh across the desert floor. Then it began to spin. A column of red dust and debris spiraled into the air. A dust devil, the driver had called it. It danced toward the town with a malevolent grace, and the horses whinnied, tossing their heads in protest. Maeve held Finn closer, shielding his face with her body as the grit peppered the coach. The world outside turned a furious, blinding orange. When it passed, the stagecoach was pulling to a halt before the most substantial building in town, a 2-story structure with a sign that read, Wells Fargo. The air was thick with the scent of hot dust, sagebrush, and something else, something metallic and new. The railroad. The letters from a man named Jesse Hale had mentioned it, a line being laid down like a steel spine through the wilderness. Jesse Hale stood in the long shadow of the livery stable, his arms crossed over his chest. He had come into town for salt licks, not to witness the arrival of the afternoon stage. Yet he found himself rooted to the spot. The heat did not seem to bother him. His skin was the color of seasoned oak from years under the New Mexico sun. At 30, his face was already carved with lines of quiet grief and hard labor. He watched the passengers disembark, his expression unreadable. He had no interest in them. His mind was on the dropping water level at Hale Creek, and the letter from his sister-in-law, Ruthie, tucked in his pocket, a letter full of foolish, desperate ideas, a mail-order bride. She had written, a woman to bring life back to the ranch. Jesse had nearly torn it to shreds. He did not need life. He needed rain, and he needed the memory of his brother, Caleb, to stop haunting his sleep. Caleb, lost to a dynamite blast while trying to carve a new waterway from the unforgiving earth. Selling off the north pasture seemed a more sensible solution than importing a stranger. A woman emerged from the coach, her hand protectively on a small boy. She was younger than he expected these women to be, with dark hair pulled back from a face that was pale despite the journey. She held herself with a straight-back dignity that seemed out of place in her faded traveling clothes. Jesse's gaze, cool and distant, fell on the child, another mouth to feed. Maeve scanned the small crowd, looking for a woman's face, for the Ruthie Hale who had corresponded with her in such a sensible, kind hand. Instead, she saw only the hard, curious stares of men, miners, cowboys, and a few men in dusty suits who had the unmistakable air of the railroad about them. Their eyes lingered on her, a mixture of pity and speculation. A widow, an immigrant, a mail-order bride. She was a curiosity, and a vulnerable one at that. Her attention was pulled away by a sudden commotion. 3 rough-looking men, their faces flushed with cheap whiskey from the saloon next door, had cornered the stage driver. One of them, a lanky man with a stained duster, made a grab for the mail pouch. The driver, a wiry old man, snapped, "Let go of that. This is United States mail." The lanky man just laughed, a sound like gravel turning over. He said, "We are just helping you unload it." Old-timer. The town's deputy, a young man with more earnestness than authority, started forward, his hand hovering uncertainly near his pistol. He called out for them to step away from the coach. Jesse watched, his body tense but still unmoving. This was the kind of petty trouble that festered in a town choking on drought and desperation. He saw the woman, Maeve, pull her son behind her skirts, her face a mask of controlled fear. But Finn was not afraid. He was fascinated by the men's horses, 3 mangy-looking beasts tied loosely to the hitching rail. He saw the led horse stamp a hoof, its eyes rolling. He saw the fraying rope, and he acted. Before Maeve could stop him, he raised the brass whistle to his lips and blew a single, piercingly sharp note. The sound cut through the tense air like a knife. It was not loud, but it was shrill and unexpected. The ruffian's horses, already on edge, reacted instantly. The lead horse reared back with a terrified snort, its eyes wide. The poorly tied rope snapped. It bolted, and its panic was contagious. The other 2 horses tore free from the rail and galloped wildly down the dusty main street, reins flying. The 3 men stared in disbelief, then swore and took off after their fleeing mounts. The distraction was all the deputy needed. He drew his pistol, his voice now firm, and told them to keep on running. The whole incident was over in less than a minute. The driver tipped his hat toward Maeve and her son. He told the boy he had good timing. Jesse had seen it all. He had seen the boy's quick thinking, the way he had assessed the situation not with fear, but with a strange, childish logic. There was courage in it. For a fleeting moment, the ice around Jesse's heart seemed to thin. Then he remembered why the woman and child were here. They were a complication he did not want, a solution to a problem he did not believe could be solved. The ice hardened again, thicker than before. He turned without a word and walked back toward the mercantile, his face set like stone. Maeve's heart was still pounding. She knelt and took Finn by his small shoulders. She said, "Finn, you must not do things like that. It was dangerous." He looked up at her, his green eyes serious. He said, "Their rope was old. The horses were scared. I helped them run away." She hugged him tight, her relief and fear a knot in her throat. She whispered that he was a good boy, a brave boy. She did not know what she would do without him. As she stood up, her gaze swept the street. She noticed a tall man in a worn hat walking away, his shoulders broad and his stride long. He had been watching them. She felt a shiver, a premonition she could not name, and quickly dismissed it. She had more immediate concerns. She asked the stage driver for directions to the boarding house. He pointed to a tidy-looking building with a porch and 2 rocking chairs. Maeve thanked him, paid for a room, and steered Finn inside, away from the prying eyes of Mesquite Crossing. The room was small and clean, with a single bed and a wash basin. It felt like a palace after the cramped stagecoach. As Finn explored every corner, Maeve sank onto the edge of the bed, the full weight of her situation settling upon her. She had made it, but the journey was far from over. She had told Ruthie Hale she was a widow. It was simpler than the truth. The truth was that her husband, a man with a charming smile and a heavy hand, had not died but had simply disappeared, leaving her with a mountain of debt and the scorn of his wealthy Boston family. They had never approved of his Irish bride. After he left, they had tried to take Finn. They had money and lawyers and influence. They painted her as an unfit mother, a poor immigrant who had trapped their son. When the courts had refused to see the truth, she had taken Finn and run. The mail-order bride advertisement had been an act of sheer desperation, a chance for a new life so far away they would never be found. But the fear was a constant companion. She saw the detective they had hired in the face of every stranger. She imagined his letters following her, casting their shadow over this fragile new beginning. She was not just Maeve O'Rourke, a woman seeking a husband. She was a fugitive, a mother protecting her child with the only weapon she had: distance. And now she was here, waiting for a woman she had never met, to be introduced to a man who had promised marriage through letters he may not have even written himself. A man who, if he was anything like the tall, cold stranger she had seen on the street, might not want a wife at all, let alone one who came with a son. The hot wind rattled the window pane, and Maeve whispered a prayer into the dusty air, a plea for this gamble, the biggest of her life, to finally pay off. Ruthie Hale arrived not with a delicate knock, but with the firm, purposeful stride of a woman who knew her own mind and intended for the world to accommodate it. She swept into the boarding house, her calico dress practical, her face weathered by the same sun as her brother-in-law's, but softened by a network of laugh lines around her eyes. She found Maeve and Finn in their small room, the boy tracing patterns in the dust on the windowsill. Ruthie's smile was immediate and genuine. She said, "You must be Maeve O'Rourke, and this handsome young man has to be Finn. I'm Ruthie." She extended a hand, her grip strong and warm. Maeve felt a wave of relief. This was the woman from the letters, the voice of reason and welcome in this harsh land. Before Maeve could properly respond, Ruthie was in motion, gathering their single, battered trunk. She said, "There is no sense in you paying for a room when there are plenty at Hale Creek. Jesse is out checking the north fence, so we will be settled in long before he returns. Let us not dawdle." The decision was made for her. Maeve found herself and Finn seated in a sturdy buckboard, heading out of Mesquite Crossing and into the vast, open country. The ranch was several miles out, nestled in a shallow valley where a creek, now little more than a trickle, gave life to a stand of cottonwood trees. The house was a solid, defensible structure of adobe and timber, with a wide porch and a look of permanence. But all around it, the land was thirsty. The grass was pale gold, and the air hummed with the dry song of cicadas. They were on the porch, sipping cool well water, when Jesse Hale rode in. He moved with the fluid grace of a man born to the saddle, but as he swung down from his horse, his eyes fell on them, and he froze. The cold, distant expression Maeve had seen in town settled over his features like a winter frost. He approached the porch slowly, his gaze fixed on Maeve, then on Finn, who had instinctively moved closer to his mother. Jesse's voice was low and devoid of welcome. He asked what this was about. Ruthie, undaunted, stepped forward. She said, "Jesse, this is Maeve O'Rourke and her son, Finn, the woman you have been corresponding with." Jesse's eyes narrowed. He looked from Maeve's determined face to Ruthie's resolute one. He said, "I have not been corresponding with anyone." He pulled a crumpled letter from his pocket, the one he had received from his sister-in-law that morning, and held it out. He said this was your doing, all of it. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Maeve. Her heart sank. This man had never wanted a bride. He had never written a single word to her. It had all been a fiction, a kindly meant deception. Ruthie did not flinch. She retrieved a small, worn Bible from her apron pocket and took out a folded piece of paper, the last letter Maeve had received, the one confirming her travel. She handed it to Jesse. She said, "You read it. I signed your name. Jesse. I did it because this ranch needs a woman's touch, and you need more than just this land to keep you from turning to stone. Caleb is gone, but you are still here. I thought a woman with grit, a woman who knows what it is to work and to survive, could help. I thought she could help you heal." Jesse's face was a mask of fury. The betrayal was a sharp, physical blow. To be managed, to be manipulated, to have his grief treated like a leaky roof that needed patching by a stranger. He crumpled the letter in his fist. He turned his cold gaze on Maeve. He said, "This has nothing to do with you, ma'am. You were brought here under false pretenses. I will not have you stay." He reached into his trousers, pulling out a worn leather wallet. He said, "I will pay for your ticket back to wherever you came from, and extra for your trouble." The offer of money was like a slap. Maeve's chin came up, a spark of defiance in her green eyes. She put a protective arm around Finn, who watched the tall, angry man with a child's solemn curiosity. She said, "I'm not asking for your charity. Mr. Hale, I am not a piece of freight to be sent back. I answered an advertisement for a wife. Yes, but what I came here for was a place to make a home, a place to do honest work and raise my son. I do not take handouts from anyone." Her voice was steady, laced with an Irish lilt that grew stronger with her emotion. A tense silence fell over the porch, broken only by the sound of an approaching carriage. A fine, black carriage, pulled by two well-groomed horses, kicked up a cloud of dust as it rolled to a stop before the house. The man who stepped out was the antithesis of Jesse Hale. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his boots polished, his face smooth and unlined by the sun. This was Silas Devereaux, the owner of the bank, the local agent for the railroad, and the man who was slowly tightening his grip on the entire valley. Devereaux tipped his hat, his smile thin and predatory. He greeted Jesse. He said, "I was just coming to see if you had reconsidered my offer. The railroad needs water for its engines. We have dug a diversion channel from the upper Rio Grande. For a fair price. We can pipe some of that water right to your doorstep. All it will take is your signature on a simple mortgage agreement." Jesse's jaw was tight. He said, "My signature, and the deed to my ranch as collateral. I know how your agreements work, Devereaux." Devereaux's smile did not waver. He said, "It is a simple matter of business. Progress requires resources. Those who control the resources will prosper. Those who do not. Well, the drought is not ending anytime soon. Your credit at the mercantile is already stretched thin. I would hate to have to instruct them to cut it off. Think of it, Hale, a guaranteed supply of water, or a foreclosed ranch. The choice is yours." He gave a polite nod toward Maeve and Ruthie, his eyes lingering on Maeve for a moment too long. Then he climbed back into his carriage and was gone, leaving a trail of dust and silent threats hanging in the air. The encounter had broken the spell of the earlier confrontation. The personal drama was dwarfed by the raw, immediate threat to their survival. Jesse looked at his parched land, then back at the woman and child on his porch. They were just one more problem on a list that was already too long. His resolve hardened. He opened his mouth to tell her to be ready to leave with the morning stage. But the words never came. The dry, hot wind that had been blowing all day began to gust, carrying with it the scent of smoke, not the pleasant smell of a cooking fire, but the acrid, dangerous smell of burning hay. A shout came from the direction of the barns. Fire. Instinct took over. Jesse sprinted toward the glow that was now visible against the twilight sky. One of the hay barns, the one closest to the smithy where a pile of coals had been left to cool, was burning. Sparks, fanned by the wind, were already leaping toward the main barn and the nearby corrals. When he reached the scene, a chaotic ballet was already in motion. The few ranch hands were trying to organize a bucket brigade from the well, and in the middle of it, working with a desperate, focused energy, were Ruthie and Maeve. Maeve had kicked off her traveling shoes. Her skirt was hitched up, and she was passing full buckets of water down the line with a strength that surprised him. Even the boy, Finn, was there, his small face smudged with soot, doggedly carrying empty buckets back to the well. Jesse plunged into the fight, his earlier anger forgotten, replaced by the primal need to save his home. He barked orders, his voice cutting through the panic, and the effort became more organized, more effective. They fought the flames for what felt like an eternity, the heat scorching their faces, the smoke filling their lungs. In a lull, as he stepped back to catch his breath, he saw something that made him pause. The horses in the main corral were frantic, rearing and kicking at the fences, their eyes wide with terror. A single spark in their enclosure would mean losing them all, but standing at the fence, his small hands gripping the rails, was Finn. He was not shouting. He was speaking to the animals in a low, calm murmur, a continuous stream of nonsensical, soothing sounds, and the horses, remarkably, were quieting. The lead mare had turned her head toward him and stood listening, her panic trembling slowly subsiding. By the time they finally got the fire under control, the hay barn was a loss, a skeleton of blackened timbers against the starry sky. But the main barn, the corrals, and the house were safe. No one was hurt. Exhausted, Jesse leaned against a fence post, surveying the damage. Maeve approached him, wiping a streak of soot from her cheek with the back of her hand. Her dress was ruined. Her hair had come loose from its pins, but her eyes, in the flickering firelight, were clear and direct. She said simply, "I am sorry about your barn." Jesse looked at her, at the woman who had fought for his property as if it were her own. He looked over at her son, who was now asleep in Ruthie's arms, the brass whistle still gleaming around his neck. He had come here to send them away, to erase this mistake his sister-in-law had made. But they had faced fire with him. The boy had calmed his horses. They had given him a gift he could not repay with money from his wallet. They had helped save what was left of his life. The words of dismissal turned to ash in his mouth. He was still angry, still wounded by the deception. But something else was there now, something confusing and unsettling. A grudging respect, a flicker of indebtedness. He looked at Maeve O'Rourke, a stranger who refused to be sent away, and for the first time, he did not know what to say. The morning after the fire dawned crisp and clear, the smoke washed from the air by a mercifully cool night breeze. Maeve was up before the sun. Her mind set she would not be an object of pity or a problem to be solved. She would be a pair of hands. She found Jesse by the corral, his back to her as he examined the scorched fence posts. His anger from the previous day had subsided, leaving behind a weary quiet that seemed even more impenetrable. Before he could speak, she made her proposal. Her voice was calm and businesslike, leaving no room for argument. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I understand I am not what you expected, but you are a man who needs help, and I am a woman who needs work. Give me 1 week, a trial. I can cook, I can clean, I can mend. I know herbs for remedies. I will tend your chickens and your garden. I will earn my keep, and my son's. At the end of the week, if you still want us gone, we will go without another word." Jesse turned slowly. He studied her face, searching for a hint of guile, but found only frank determination. It was an unconventional offer. But the fire had left them short-handed, and the threat from Devereaux loomed large. A week of help was a week of help, no matter where it came from. And perhaps, a small part of him admitted, he was curious to see if her mettle from the night of the fire was a fluke. He gave a single, curt nod. 1 week, he said. And so, a strange new rhythm began at Hale Creek. Maeve moved through the ranch house with a quiet efficiency that was both astonishing and a little unnerving. She did not just cook. She made the salt pork and beans taste better than they had a right to, adding wild onions and herbs she found near the creek. She did not just mend. She patched Jesse's work shirts with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She took over the chicken coop, and within days, the hens were laying more regularly than they had all summer. Her biggest challenge came in the form of Tío Abel, the ancient, wiry Mexican cook and vaquero who had been with the Hale family since before Jesse was born. He guarded his kitchen like a fortress, viewing Maeve as an unwelcome invader. Their first encounter was a standoff over a pot of chili. He grumbled, in a thick accent, that a woman's chili is always too weak. It needs fire, not just spice. Maeve, tasting a spoonful, replied without missing a beat. And a man's chili is often all fire and no flavor. It should warm the belly, Tío Abel, not burn it down. A slow grin spread across the old man's wrinkled face. From that day on, a respectful, sharp-witted truce was declared between them. Maeve listened to his stories of the old days, and he, in turn, showed her how to properly render lard and make tortillas that were paper-thin and perfect. Finn, meanwhile, found his own place in this new world. He became Tío Abel's shadow, his bright curiosity a constant source of amusement for the old man. Tío Abel taught him how to tie a dozen different knots, explaining the purpose of each one, Most importantly, he introduced Finn to Cricket, a long-legged foal whose mother had died during birth. The small horse and the small boy formed an instant, unspoken bond. Finn spent hours grooming Cricket with a soft brush, whispering secrets into the foal's twitching ears. One afternoon, Finn came running into the kitchen, his face alight with mischief. He held up a small, wriggling garter snake by the tail. "For you, Tio Abel," he declared. "I will trade you for a cinnamon pastry." Tio Abel feigned a great terror, then laughed, a wheezing, joyful sound. He shooed the snake out the door and presented Finn with the largest, warmest pastry from the oven. While Maeve's days were filled with domestic tasks, Jesse insisted on one other thing. He said, "If you are to live in this country, you will learn to ride, and ride well. It is not a luxury, it is a necessity." So, every afternoon, in the heat of the day, he would lead out a steady, patient mare named Delilah. His teaching style was as brusque and practical as the man himself. He did not offer praise, only corrections. Keep your heels down. Look where you are going, not at the horse's head. Feel the rhythm of her walk. Do not fight it. At first, Maeve was stiff and awkward, her body sore in places she did not know existed, but she was a determined student. She listened to his clipped instructions. She watched how his body moved with his horse, and slowly, she began to understand. She learned to trust the strength of the animal beneath her, to feel the subtle shifts of muscle and respond in kind. Jesse never said she was doing well, but one afternoon he made her ride the perimeter of the home pasture, and he did not correct her once. For Jesse, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The uneasy piece of their trial week was not confined to the ranch. On a trip into Mesquite Crossing for supplies, Maeve felt the weight of the community's judgment. Velma Kate, the sharp-tongued woman who ran the saloon, saw her outside the mercantile and made a loud comment to a companion about how some women find clever shortcuts to a man's property. At the church social, the mayor's wife looked down her nose at Maeve, remarking that it was a pity when a single mother had to impose on the charity of others. The words stung, but Maeve held her head high. She had faced worse than gossip. She was here to work, not to win a popularity contest. The real trouble, as always, came not from people but from the land itself. The creek, the lifeblood of the ranch, was shrinking daily. The water level had dropped below the intake for their main irrigation ditch. Jesse spent his days staring at the dry channel, the lines around his mouth tightening. He began talking about a desperate plan digging a new, deeper channel farther upstream, but that would mean cutting across a section of land that Silas Devereaux also claimed, a piece of ground with a disputed survey line. It was a direct challenge, and one he was not sure he could win. The tension on the ranch was a palpable thing, as thick and heavy as the summer heat. The week was almost over. Jesse had not mentioned her leaving, but he had not asked her to stay either. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. One night, unable to sleep, Maeve stepped out onto the porch. The moon was a silver dollar in a sky full of diamond dust, bathing the landscape in an ethereal glow. It was almost peaceful. Then she heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound, carried on the night air, the scrape of a shovel against rock, and the sharp thud of a post being driven into the ground. She did not hesitate. She ran to the bunkhouse and shook Jesse awake, her voice a harsh whisper. "Someone is on our land. I heard them." Jesse was instantly alert. He pulled on his boots and grabbed his rifle, moving with a silent, deadly purpose. He, Maeve, and Tio Abel slipped out of the house and made their way toward the sound, using the shadows of the cottonwoods for cover. In the moonlight, they saw them. Two men, silhouetted against the sky. One was driving wooden survey stakes into the ground, marking a new property line that cut deep into the Hale's best grazing pasture. The other man stood watching, a rifle held loosely in his hands. Even from a distance, Maeve recognized his lean, dangerous frame from the wanted posters in town. It was Cutter Pike, a hired gun known to work for Devereaux. Jesse raised his rifle, the moonlight glinting off the long barrel. Tio Abel did the same. The click of the hammers being pulled back was unnaturally loud in the still night. Jesse's voice cut through the darkness, cold and steady. He said, "You are on the wrong side of the fence. Pike!" Cutter Pike turned, not with a start, but with a slow, deliberate motion. He did not seem surprised. He raised his own rifle, its muzzle pointed squarely at Jesse's chest. He said, "Devereaux says the survey was wrong. This is railroad land now. He just sent us to mark it proper." The air crackled with lethal potential. A single wrong move, a nervous twitch of a finger, and the moonlit pasture would become a killing ground. Maeve held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw Jesse's knuckles whiten as he gripped his rifle. She saw the years of frustration, the grief for his brother, the anger at Devereaux, all coalesce into this single, explosive moment. But then something shifted in Jesse's eyes. He thought of the fire. He thought of the long, hard work it would take to rebuild. He thought of the woman and child who were now, for better or worse, under his protection. A gunfight would solve nothing. It would only bring more loss, more grief. He lowered his rifle by a fraction of an inch. His voice was still hard, but the killing edge was gone. He said, "You tell Devereaux that if he wants to talk about survey lines, he can do it in the daylight, with the law present. Now get off my land." For a long moment, no one moved. Cutter Pike stared at Jesse, his eyes shadowed by the brim of his hat. Then, with a slight shrug, he lowered his own weapon. He motioned to his partner. They pulled up their stakes, mounted their horses, and rode away into the darkness. Jesse stood watching them go, the rifle heavy in his hands. Maeve let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. He had faced down a killer, not with bullets, but with something far more difficult to muster restraint. He had chosen the long, hard fight of the law over the short, easy violence of the gun. As he turned to walk back to the house, he glanced at her, and in the moonlight, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes she had not seen before. It was not warmth, not yet, but it was a recognition, an acknowledgement that they were standing on the same side of the line, facing the same enemy, under the same unforgiving sky. The week of Maeve's trial came and went without a word spoken of it. Her presence on the Hale Creek ranch, and Finn's, simply became a fact, woven into the daily fabric of survival. An unspoken truce existed between her and Jesse. He provided a roof and protection. She provided a level of comfort and order the house had not known since his mother passed. The riding lessons continued, as did the quiet. Shared meals on the porch, but a chasm of unspoken things remained between them. It was a fragile peace, as delicate as a spider's web in the morning mist, and Maeve knew it could be broken by the slightest tremor. The tremor arrived on a Tuesday, in the form of a man who did not belong in Mesquite Crossing. He stepped off the morning stage wearing a dark city suit, a bowler hat, and shoes that were already coated in a film of red dust. He moved with a purposeful, unhurried air, his eyes scanning the town not with the curiosity of a traveler, but with the cool assessment of a hunter. He walked directly to the sheriff's office and tacked a single, professionally printed notice to the public board. Maeve saw it later that day when she rode into town with Ruthie for flour and thread. Her eyes, like everyone's, were drawn to the new piece of paper among the faded auction notices and wanted posters. She read the bold heading first, "Missing Child." Her blood ran cold. She moved closer, her heart beginning a slow, heavy drum against her ribs. The notice described a boy, 6 years of age, with sandy hair and green eyes. It mentioned a distinctive brass whistle he always carried. It gave his name as Finnegan Connell. A generous reward was offered for information leading to his safe return to his loving grandfather in Boston. The name of a Pinkerton agent, a Mr. Thompson, was listed at the bottom. Ruthie, reading over her shoulder, made a sympathetic sound. She said, "Imagine losing your grandbaby like that. What a terrible thing. Maeve could not speak. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The heat of the sun, the smell of the dust, the sounds of the town all faded into a roaring in her ears. Finnegan Connell. They were here. The past she had run from for 1,000 miles had finally caught up. She felt Ruthie's hand on her arm, her voice filled with concern. "Maeve, are you all right? You look as though you have seen a ghost." Maeve forced a nod, whispering that it was just the heat. But as they walked away from the board, she could feel the agent's printed words burning into her back. The hunt was on. That night, after Finn was asleep, his small hand curled around the brass whistle, Maeve knew she could no longer keep her silence. She found Jessie and Ruthie on the porch. The confession came out in a torrent, a story she had held inside for so long it felt like it was tearing her apart. She told them her name was not O'Rourke, but Connell. She told them her husband had not been a good man. To the world, he was charming, the handsome son of a wealthy family. But behind closed doors, he had a temper like a coiled snake, and his words were filled with a venom that made her feel small and worthless. He never raised a hand to Finn, but he created a home filled with a fear so thick you could taste it. When he disappeared on one of his long gambling trips and never came back, his family had blamed her. They called her an Irish gutter snipe who had ruined their son. They used their money and their influence to take her to court, claiming she was an unstable and unfit mother. Her voice broke as she recounted the humiliation of the courtroom, the way the judge had looked at her worn dress and her lack of a lawyer. And then at the Connell family's expensive attorney. He had granted them custody of Finn, not because of love, but because of money. So she had run. She had taken her son, changed their names, and fled west, searching for a place where a mother's love was worth more than a grandfather's gold. When she finished, a heavy silence hung in the night air. Ruthie reached out and took Maeve's hand, her touch firm and reassuring. Jessie just sat there, staring out into the darkness, his face unreadable. Maeve's heart ached. She expected him to be angry, to tell her she had brought a hornet's nest to his doorstep. She braced herself for the final dismissal. He finally spoke, his voice rough. He asked why she had not told him. She whispered, "Because I was afraid you would send us away." He did not reply. He just stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, a solitary figure outlined against the stars. Maeve interpreted his silence as condemnation. He saw her now for what she was, a legal problem, a woman with a dangerous secret. But Jessie was not thinking of the law. He was thinking of his brother, Caleb. He remembered the fierce, protective love he had felt for his younger brother. He remembered his desperate, failed attempt to save him from the consequences of their shared dream. He had tried to protect Caleb, and Caleb had died. Now, here was another person, two people, in desperate need of protection. The weight of it settled on his shoulders, a familiar, terrifying burden. He was afraid that he would try to save them and fail again, afraid of what it would cost him to care for someone only to lose them. It was a risk he was not sure he could take. So he did what felt safest. He built a wall around his heart and kept his distance. A few days later, Silas Devereaux sat in his cool, dark office at the bank, listening with great interest to the Pinkerton agent. Mr. Thompson was efficient, laying out the facts of the Connell case. Devereaux steepled his fingers, a slow smile spreading across his face. He saw the situation not as a family tragedy, but as a beautiful piece of leverage. He said, "It seems to me, Mr. Thompson, that your investigation could benefit from some local assistance. The boy and his mother are currently residing at the Hale Creek Ranch. The owner, Jesse Hale, is a stubborn man. Perhaps a bit of pressure, applied in the right places, would convince him to be more cooperative with your recovery efforts." Devereaux saw the path forward with perfect clarity. He would help the Connell family retrieve the boy. Maeve, with her reason for staying gone, would be forced to leave, and Jesse Hale, already isolated by grief, would be left truly alone, his spirit broken. He would be in no position to fight for his land or his water. It was a cruel, elegant solution. The distance between Maeve and Jessie grew into a tangible thing. The riding lessons became exercises in silence. Their conversations were limited to the necessities of running the ranch. Maeve, seeing his withdrawal through the lens of her own fear, was certain she had become a liability in his eyes. He was regretting his decision to let her stay. The knowledge was a constant, dull ache in her chest. The town's annual harvest festival arrived, a welcome respite from the long, hot summer. It was a day of horse races, baking contests, and a barn dance in the evening. Ruthie insisted they all go, arguing that a little bit of fun would do them all good. The festival grounds were bustling. For a few hours, Maeve almost forgot the shadow that hung over them. She watched Finn, his face sticky with molasses candy, as he cheered for a three-legged race. She felt a lightness she had not felt in years. Then, it all came crashing down. She was at the dry goods stall, admiring a bolt of deep blue calico fabric, the first pretty thing she had allowed herself to want in a very long time. As she asked the merchant to cut her a length for a new dress, she saw Cutter Pike leaning against a nearby wagon, talking to a group of men. He was speaking in a low voice, but it carried. He was saying something about mail-order brides and how some of them were clever actresses, wrapping grieving men around their little fingers to get a claim on their land. He did not use her name, but every eye at the stall turned to her. The merchant, a man who had been friendly enough just a moment before, suddenly pulled the bolt of fabric back. His face was tight with disapproval. He said, "I do not think I have enough here for you. This is reserved." The rejection was a public slap. Maeve felt her face flush with heat. The whispers of the other women were like the buzzing of angry bees. She stood there, frozen, the object of their scorn. Then, a voice cut through the murmurs, low and calm. "How much for the whole bolt?" Jessie was standing behind her. He had seen the whole thing. He did not look at Cutter Pike or the crowd. His eyes were on the merchant. The merchant stammered, "Well, it is a whole bolt. Mr. Hale, it is expensive." Jessie reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He laid the bills on the counter. His voice was quiet, but it carried to everyone in the vicinity. He said, "The women of this valley work hard. My sister-in-law, the wives of my ranch hands. All of them. They deserve good cloth." He turned to the stunned group of women who had been whispering moments before. He said, "Ladies, please, help yourselves. Courtesy of Hale Creek." A stunned silence was followed by a flurry of surprised laughter and grateful thanks. The women, who a minute ago had been judging Maeve, now swarmed the counter, eagerly accepting Jessie's offer. The merchant, flustered but not willing to argue with a man who had just bought his most expensive item, began measuring and cutting. Jessie gave a slight nod to Maeve, then turned and walked away without another word. Cutter Pike spat on the ground and melted back into the crowd, his attempt to shame Maeve having backfired spectacularly. Maeve watched Jessie go, her heart a confusing mix of gratitude and turmoil. He had defended her, not with words, but with an act of bold, defiant generosity that had silenced the gossips more effectively than any argument. He had stood with her, for all the town to see, but she knew the wall between them was still there, as high and as solid as ever. The public gesture had saved her from humiliation, but it had done nothing to bridge the silent, lonely distance that now defined their lives. The days following the harvest festival were a blur of relentless work. Jessie, driven by the ever-present threat of the dying creek, decided he could wait no longer. He gathered his few ranch hands and Tio Abel, and together they began the back-breaking task of digging the new irrigation ditch. They worked from sunup to sundown, their shovels ringing against the rocky soil, their bodies slick with sweat under the merciless sun. Maeve and Finn did their part. They hauled buckets of water from the well to the thirsty men, brought them their midday meal, and tended to the blisters and cuts that were an inevitable part of the labor. The wall between Maeve and Jessie remained, but it was a wall they now stood on either side of while fighting the same battle. The shared purpose created a silent bond, a recognition of mutual endurance. One late afternoon, the sky, which had been a flawless, searing blue for weeks, began to change. Dark, bruised-looking clouds gathered on the horizon, and a strange, electric stillness fell over the land. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain, a smell so unfamiliar it was almost shocking. The first drops were fat and slow, kicking up puffs of red dust. Then, with a sudden, violent roar, the heavens opened. It was a deluge, a freak desert storm that turned the dry ground to slick mud in an instant. The men, caught out in the open, abandoned their tools and ran for the cover of the main barn. Maeve and Finn had been heading back to the house, but the ferocity of the downpour trapped them. They scrambled into the horse barn, the rain plastering their clothes to their skin and soaking their hair. The air inside was warm and smelled of hay and horses. The animals shifted in their stalls, their soft whinnies a counterpoint to the drumming of the rain on the roof. Finn, exhausted from the day's excitement, curled up on a pile of clean straw. His head pillowed on Cricket's flank and fell fast asleep. Maeve sat beside him, pulling her damp shawl tighter around her shoulders, and watched the sheets of rain through the open barn door. The storm was a wild, beautiful, terrifying thing. The barn door creaked open wider, and Jesse stepped inside, shaking the water from his hat. He had come to check on the animals. He stopped when he saw her, a solitary figure in the deepening gloom, her face illuminated by a single lantern hanging from a beam. He walked over and stood looking down at Finn. The boy was sleeping soundly, his face peaceful, his small hand still clutching the brass whistle. For the first time since she had met him, Maeve saw the hard lines of Jesse's face soften. A smile, a real one, not a grimace or a tight line of the lips, touched his mouth. It transformed his face, chasing away the shadows of grief and leaving behind a startling warmth. He spoke, his voice so low it was almost a whisper, more to himself than to her. "He came with a son. I thought he would send them away, but he just smiled." The words were a strange echo of her own fears, her own expectations. She had been so sure he saw them as a burden. To hear him admit, even in this roundabout way, that he had not sent them away, that he had perhaps even found a reason to smile at their presence, was a revelation. It cracked the wall between them, letting in a sliver of unexpected light. The rain continued to fall, a steady, soothing rhythm. The air in the barn grew cool. Maeve shivered. Jesse, noticing, shrugged off his heavy canvas duster and draped it over her shoulders. The coat was warm from his body and smelled of leather and the storm. It was a simple, practical gesture, but it felt intensely intimate. He sat down on the straw bale across from her, the lantern light casting long, dancing shadows around them. The silence that fell was different from the tense, awkward silences of the past. This was a comfortable quiet, a shared moment of peace in the heart of the storm. Maeve found herself speaking, her voice soft in the dim light. She said, "If you want us to go, Jesse, you only have to say the word. After this is all over, with the Pinkerton and my husband's family, we will not be a trouble to you." He looked at her, his gaze direct and serious. He said, "You are not a trouble, Maeve. The trouble was here long before you arrived." He reached out, his calloused fingers gently tucking a stray, damp strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was hesitant, almost shy. He then let his hand cup her cheek, his thumb stroking the soft skin. His hand was trembling slightly, not with passion, but with a kind of nervous reverence, a long, dormant tenderness stirring to life. He leaned in, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. She met his gaze, her own green eyes wide and questioning in the lantern light. His lips met hers, a soft, searching pressure. It was not a kiss of fire and demand, but of quiet discovery. It tasted of rain and earth and a profound, unspoken loneliness. It was a kiss of respect, an acknowledgement of the woman who had fought a fire, mended his shirts, and stood her ground with a quiet dignity that humbled him. When he pulled back, the space between them shimmered with a new and fragile thing: hope. He did not say anything else. He just stood up, gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, and walked back out into the storm, leaving her with the warmth of his coat and the ghost of his kiss on her lips. Later that night, the storm passed, leaving the air washed clean and the earth smelling of new life. The moon broke through the clouds, bathing the ranch in a silvery light. Inside the house, everyone slept the deep, exhausted sleep of those who have worked hard and found a moment of peace. But not all was peaceful in Mesquite Crossing. A lone figure, Mr. Thompson, the Pinkerton agent, slipped out of his room at the boarding house. He moved through the silent, muddy streets with a practiced stealth. His destination, the Hale Creek Ranch. He did not go near the house. He went to the corral where Cricket, the foal, was kept. He took a small, sharp knife from his pocket and, with a quick, expert movement, cut a tiny, almost unnoticeable notch in the foal's left ear. It was a mark, a way to identify the animal. He was not unobserved. From the darkened window of the saloon, Velma Kate had been watching. She had seen the city man sneak out and had been overcome with a nosy curiosity. She saw him ride out of town and, on a whim, decided to follow at a distance. She saw him at the Hale Corral. She did not understand the meaning of the small act of mutilation, but she knew it was secretive and therefore suspicious. Her curiosity turned to alarm when Thompson rode back to town, not to the boarding house, but to the bank. A light was on in Silas Devereaux's office. Velma Kate dismounted and crept to the side of the building, pressing her ear to the thin wall beneath the open window. She heard Devereaux's smooth, confident voice. "Is it done?" Thompson's voice was flat. "Professional. The animal is marked. We will give it a day or two. Let the boy get attached, then we will make our move. We will claim the horse was stolen from a client back east. The brand is forged, of course, but it will look legitimate enough to the local law. The boy will protest. He will not want to give up his pet. He will create a scene. And in the commotion, while everyone is focused on the horse, I will take the child. It will be clean. We will be gone before Hale even knows what has happened." Devereaux chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "Excellent. Thompson, a brilliant plan. Removing the boy will remove the mother, and a heartbroken Jessie Hale will be much more agreeable to my business proposals." Velma Kate's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. This was not just about a missing child. This was a cruel, calculated scheme to break a man and steal his land. With a little boy and his horse as the pawns, her personal dislike for Maeve's situation evaporated, replaced by a fierce, protective anger. She backed away from the window, her mind racing. She had to warn them. She slipped back to her horse and rode like the devil himself was on her heels, not toward her own bed, but out toward the Hale Creek Ranch, a messenger of bad faith under the newly washed moon. Velma Kate arrived at a gallop, her horse lathered and heaving, its breath pluming in the cool, rain-washed air. She slid from the saddle before the animal had fully stopped, her face grim in the moonlight. The news she brought fell like a volley of stones into the fragile peace of the night. She recounted the conversation she had overheard, her voice low and urgent, sparing no detail of Devereaux's cruel calculus. The lantern light on the porch cast long shadows, turning the faces of Jessie, Maeve, and Ruthie into masks of disbelief, then cold fury. Maeve felt a familiar, sickening dread, the same helplessness she had felt in that Boston courtroom, but this time it was mixed with something new, a hard, unyielding anger. Finn was not a pawn in a game of land and water. He was her son. Jessie listened, his body utterly still, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The kiss in the barn, the moment of connection, now felt like a lifetime ago. This was not just a business dispute anymore. Devereaux had threatened a child under his roof. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. This was an act of war. True to Velma's warning, the assault began not with guns, but with paper. 2 days later, a deputy sheriff rode out to the ranch. He carried a legal document, a warrant signed by a traveling circuit judge who was known to be in Silas Devereaux's pocket. The document was a masterpiece of legal fiction, citing the Pinkerton notice and expressing grave concern for the welfare of a child in the care of a woman of unstable character and questionable legal standing. It ordered that Finnegan Connell be taken into the temporary custody of the court for his own safety, pending a formal hearing. It was a trap, and they all knew it. Once Finn was in the court's custody, he would be in Devereaux's hands. Jesse read the document, his face like granite. He told the deputy the boy was not there, that he would bring his lawyer to town to discuss the matter. The deputy, a young man who looked deeply uncomfortable, accepted the answer and retreated, but they all knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Devereaux had made his move. The hearing was set for the following week. The second storm arrived the next day. A malevolent twin to the first, the clouds boiled up from the south, black and heavy, and the rain came not in sheets, but as a solid wall of water. The parched land, unable to absorb any more moisture, gave way. The creek, a gentle trickle just days before, swelled into a raging, muddy torrent. From the porch, they heard it before they saw it, a deep, grinding roar from up the valley. The new irrigation ditch, their great hope, had become their enemy. The force of the water had overwhelmed the unfinished earthworks. The ditch had breached its banks, and a flash flood was tearing down the shallow valley. A wave of red water, rocks, and uprooted mesquite. The wall of water slammed into the low-lying pasture, turning it into a shallow, churning lake. It surged toward the arroyo, the deep, dry gully that cut across the property, transforming it into a violent river. Finn, who had been watching the storm with a mixture of fear and fascination, saw one of the new foals, panicked by the noise, break through a weakened fence and bolt toward the chaos. It was Cricket. Without a thought, Finn ran after him, his small legs pumping, his voice calling the foal's name. Maeve screamed his name, but her voice was lost in the roar of the flood. She and Jesse ran after him. They saw Finn get close to the edge of the arroyo, his eyes on the terrified foal on the other side. The bank, already sodden, gave way under his feet. With a small cry, he slid down the muddy incline and into the raging water. Time seemed to slow down. Maeve did not think, she acted. She saw a coil of riata, the rope Jesse and Tio Abel had been teaching her to use, hanging on a fence post. She snatched it up, her fingers automatically forming the loop Jesse had shown her. She ran to the edge of the arroyo and, without a moment's hesitation, jumped in after her son. The current was a powerful, living thing, pulling at her, trying to drag her under. The water was shockingly cold and thick with mud. She saw Finn's head bobbing just a few yards away, his arms flailing. She fought her way toward him, the rope clutched in her hand. She shouted for him to grab the rope. He was a strong swimmer for his age, but the current was too much. She threw the loop. It fell short. She pulled it back, her arms aching, and threw it again. This time, it landed over his head and shoulders. She pulled it tight, securing him. Just as she got a firm hold, she felt another body slam into the water beside her. It was Jesse. He had tied the other end of the riata around his own waist. Now! He grabbed hold of the rope between them, his powerful arms acting as an anchor in the torrent. He yelled, his voice raw, for her to hold on to the boy, that he would pull them in. It was a desperate, brutal struggle against the flood. Jesse dug his boots into the collapsing bank, his muscles straining, pulling them inch by agonizing inch out of the main current and toward the relative safety of the arroyo's edge. Maeve clung to Finn, shielding him with her body from the debris being swept along by the water. Finally, with one last, monumental effort, Jesse hauled them up onto the muddy bank. They lay there, gasping for breath, soaked, shivering, and covered in red mud. but alive. All three of them. As they staggered to their feet, their moment of desperate relief was shattered. Mr. Thompson, the Pinkerton agent, appeared as if from nowhere, his city suit splattered with mud. He had been watching from a distance, waiting for an opportunity. The chaos of the flood was the perfect cover. He strode toward them, his voice cold and official. He said, "I am taking the boy. It is clear he is not safe here." He reached for Finn, but before he could lay a hand on him, a human wall formed in his path. Velma Kate stood in front of him, her arms crossed, her face a thundercloud. Behind her were a half-dozen other women from the town, the same women who had accepted Jesse's gift of fabric. They had seen the commotion and had come to help. Velma's voice was like cracking whip. She said, "You will not touch that child. We all saw what happened. This woman saved her son's life. If you want to talk about what is best for a child, we have a few things to say. We will go to that judge of yours and testify about the kind of family that would hire a man like you to hunt down a little boy." Thompson stared at the determined faces of the women, a formidable, unexpected jury of his peers. His authority, so absolute on paper, withered in the face of their collective, righteous anger. He took a step back, his plan unraveling in the mud and the rain. Defeated for the moment, he turned and stalked away. But the danger had not passed. It had only changed its shape. That night, as an exhausted peace settled over the flood-damaged ranch, Silas Devereaux made his final, desperate move. His legal scheme had been washed away, his agent thwarted. He fell back on the simple, brutal logic of power. Under the cover of darkness, he and Cutter Pike rode to the ranch. They did not bother with stealth. They kicked open the door to the small room where Finn slept, before Maeve or Jesse could react. Cutter Pike had the sleeping boy wrapped in a blanket, and Devereaux had a pistol aimed at Jesse's heart. Devereaux's voice was smooth, devoid of any emotion. He said, "Do not be a fool. Hale, the boy is my insurance. You will sign over the water rights to the North Pasture. Meet me at the temporary railroad depot at sunup. Come alone. If I see anyone else, the boy will pay the price." They were gone as quickly as they had come. Melting into the night, the room felt impossibly empty. On the floor, gleaming in the lantern light, lay Finn's brass whistle. He must have dropped it in the struggle. Maeve picked it up, the metal cold against her skin. A terrifying calm settled over her. She had run from judges and lawyers. She had fought floods and gossip. She had done everything the world had asked of her, and it had not been enough. They had taken her son, the system, the law. All of it had failed her. She looked at Jesse, her green eyes blazing with a light he had never seen before. Her voice was quiet, but it was as hard and as final as a death sentence. She said, "We are not waiting for sunup, and we are not waiting for the law. Their laws are not made for us. We are getting him back, now." There was no discussion, no debate. There was only a cold, shared resolve. While Ruthie armed herself with a heavy shotgun, T.O. Abel saddled the 4 fastest horses, his movements swift and economical in the lantern-lit barn. He handed Maeve a small, balanced pistol, its wooden grip smooth and cool in her trembling hand. He said, "It shoots straight, just point and pull." Jesse checked his own rifle, his face a grim mask. They were no longer ranchers defending their land. They were a posse, bound by a singular purpose. T.O. Abel, his eyes scanning the muddy ground, found their trail almost immediately. 2 horses riding hard for the Badlands, they rode into the darkness, a small, silent group against the vast, indifferent landscape. The moon, their only guide, cast long, eerie shadows that twisted the familiar shapes of cactus and rock into monstrous forms. As they rode, the air began to change. The clean, rain-washed scent was replaced by the taste of grit. The wind, which had been calm, began to whip and moan, a low, ominous sound that grew steadily in volume. A dust storm was brewing, a roiling wall of sand and dirt advancing across the desert. They pushed the horses harder, racing the storm. The trail led them to Skeleton Wash, a narrow, winding canyon carved by 1,000 years of flash floods. The walls of the canyon offered some protection from the wind, but it also created a perfect bottleneck, a natural trap. Somewhere ahead, in the rising howl of the wind, they heard a new sound, the high metallic shriek of a train whistle. Devereaux was not just hiding, he was heading for a rendezvous. They rounded a sharp bend in the wash and saw them. A temporary railroad depot, little more than a wooden platform and a water tower, stood beside a newly laid stretch of track. A small locomotive sat idling, its headlamp cutting a weak yellow beam through the swirling dust. Devereaux was there, holding a terrified Finn by the arm. Cutter Pike stood nearby, his rifle held at the ready. Jesse reined in his horse, raising a hand to halt the others. They were outgunned and outnumbered. With Finn caught in the middle, a frontal assault was suicide. But the storm was their ally. The wind was now a gale, tearing at their clothes, the dust so thick it was like a suffocating blanket. Visibility was dropping to near zero. Jesse leaned over to Maeve, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. He said, "I will draw their fire. When I do, you and TOA will go for Finn. Ruthie, you cover us from the rocks." Before Maeve could protest, he spurred his horse forward, firing his rifle into the air. The shot was swallowed by the storm, but the muzzle flash cut through the gloom. Devereaux and Pike spun around, firing blindly into the dust. In that moment of confusion, Maeve and Teoabel charged. Maeve slid from her horse as it galloped past the platform, landing with a jarring thud. She scrambled to her feet, the pistol clutched in her hand. Teoabel, with the skill of a master vaquero, threw his riata. The loop snaked through the air and settled perfectly around Cutter Pike's rifle, yanking it from his grasp. Maeve ran toward Finn, her only thought to get between him and the danger. She reached the platform just as Cutter Pike drew his sidearm. He leveled it at Finn, his face a snarl of rage and frustration. Devereaux shouted at him to get the boy on the train. Maeve did not stop. She placed herself directly in front of the pistol's barrel, shielding her son with her own body. She was trembling, but her voice was steady, and it cut through the noise of the storm. She looked directly into Cutter Pike's eyes. She said, "I know who you are. I see it in your face. You were a boy like him once. Weren't you poor, scared, with no one to stand for you? Someone powerful, someone like a mine owner or a railroad man, took something from you, your land, your family, your hope, and you have spent your whole life trying to take it back from others, thinking it would make you feel strong. But it never does. Does it? Look at him. Cutter, look at my son. Is this who you are now? A man who points a gun at a frightened child." Her words were a volley, each one striking a target deep inside the gunman. His hand, the one holding the pistol, began to tremble. His eyes, for a moment, lost their hardness, and in them, Maeve saw a flicker of a long-forgotten pain. He hesitated. That hesitation was all Devereaux needed to see. He shrieked in frustration. "You fool!" He raised his own pistol and fired wildly into the swirling dust. A searing pain shot through Jesse's left arm as a bullet grazed him. He staggered but did not fall. In that instant, with Cutter's will broken and Jesse wounded, Maeve acted. She raised the small pistol Teoabel had given her, pointed it at the man who had stolen her son, and pulled the trigger. The shot was sharp and clear, a single note of finality in the chaotic symphony of the storm. Silas Devereaux crumpled to the platform, a look of stunned surprise on his face. Maeve ran to Finn, scooping him into her arms, holding him tight as the dust storm, in a final, furious act, swallowed the entire scene, hiding them all in its swirling, red embrace. When the dust finally began to settle, the world was changed. Silas Devereaux lay still. Cutter Pike was gone, vanished into the storm like a ghost. The locomotive hissed and steamed, its journey to nowhere canceled. A new figure emerged from the gloom. It was Mr. Thompson, the Pinkerton. He had followed the tracks, drawn by the sound of the train. He took in the scene: the fallen banker, the wounded rancher, the mother clinging to her child, the armed women standing guard in the rocks. He listened as Ruthie and Tio Abel gave a stark, unvarnished account of what had transpired. He looked at the evidence of the boy's near drowning, heard Velma Kate's testimony about the plot she had overheard, and saw the undeniable truth in Maeve's fierce, protective eyes. He was a man of the law, but he was not a fool. His client was dead. The case against Maeve, already flimsy, was now contradicted by a dozen credible witnesses. He made a decision. He walked over to Maeve, his face impassive. He said, "For the good of the child, the Connell family is withdrawing their petition. My investigation is closed." He tipped his hat and walked away, his job in Mesquite Crossing finished. Later, as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky, they stood by the newly repaired irrigation ditch. The flood had been destructive, but it had also scoured the channel deeper, and a steady, life-giving stream of water now flowed toward the thirsty fields. Jesse, his arm bandaged, turned to Maeve. He was holding the riata, the same rope that had pulled them from the floodwaters. He did not have a ring. He did not have pretty words. He had only the raw, undeniable truth of what they had become. He held out the rope to her. He said, "We were tied together by this. Not by debt, not by deception. We chose to hold on." He met her gaze, his eyes clear and free of the shadows that had haunted them for so long. He said, "Maeve O'Rourke, I am asking you to choose it again, not because you owe me anything, but because you want to marry me. Let's build a life together." Maeve looked at the rope, a simple tool of survival that had become a symbol of their bond. She looked at Finn, safe and asleep in the wagon, and she looked at Jesse Hale, the quiet, wounded man who had stood for her when no one else would. She took the end of the rope, her fingers closing over his. Her answer was in her smile, a promise of new beginnings, as bright and as welcome as the water flowing in the ditch. The death of Silas Devereaux and the quiet departure of the Pinkerton agent sent a shockwave through Mesquite Crossing. The story, pieced together from the accounts of Ruthie, Velma, Kate, and the other women, became a local legend overnight. Maeve was no longer the scandalous mail-order bride or the desperate fugitive. She was the woman who had faced down a flash flood and a gunman to save her child. The whispers did not stop, but their tone changed from condemnation to awe, respect. In the hard country of the New Mexico Territory was not given freely. It was earned in moments of fire and water and unshakable courage. But Maeve had little time for legends. She saw a need, and she moved to fill it. Many of the children of the itinerant ranch hands and shepherds had never learned to hold a pencil, let alone read a book. In the evenings, after her own work was done, she cleared the long table in the main room of the ranch house, lit a few extra lanterns, and started a school. Her first students were a handful of shy, dirt-smudged children. Soon, their mothers began to linger at the back of the room, listening, their face etched with a hunger for knowledge they had long since suppressed. Maeve taught them their letters using the Bible and old newspapers, and she taught them their numbers by counting sacks of grain and chickens in the yard. It was a small, simple thing, but it sent ripples of change through the community. Jesse, in his own quiet way, was also building a new future. The water flowing in the new ditch was a source of envy for the smaller ranchers whose properties dotted the valley. They had watched him fight for it, and they expected him to hoard it, just as Devereaux would have done. Instead, Jesse rode out to each of his neighbors. He proposed a plan not of selling the water, but of sharing it. He organized a work crew, made up of men from a half-dozen different homesteads, to dig a series of secondary channels, a network of shared arteries that would bring life to all their lands. It was a revolutionary idea in a place where survival had always been a solitary struggle. He was no longer just Jesse Hale, the grieving rancher. He was becoming a leader, a man who understood that a community was stronger than any one man. Their wedding took place a month later, not in a church, but on the banks of the new shared canal as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of purple and orange. Maeve wore a dress made from the bolt of deep blue calico Jesse had bought her at the festival, its simple lines flattering her quiet strength. Jesse stood beside her, his wounded arm now healed, his eyes clear and fixed on her face. The circuit preacher, a man with a kind face and a booming voice, kept his sermon short and his blessings heartfelt. Finn stood between them, holding the riata that served as their wedding ring, a loop of rope connecting all three of them. When the vows were spoken and the preacher declared them man and wife, Ruthie stepped forward. She was holding Finn's brass whistle, polished until it gleamed. She knelt so she was eye to eye with the boy. She said, "A long time ago, you used this whistle to call for help, and help came. Last night, you lost it, and your mother and father went into a storm to bring you home. Its job as a call for rescue is done. Finn, now, it has a new job." She placed the leather thong back over his head. "From now on, this is your call home. Whenever you blow it, it means it is time for supper. It means it is time for the family to be together." Finn looked from Ruthie's smiling face to Jesse and Maeve, and a slow, comprehending smile spread across his own. He understood. The symbol of his fear and his flight had been transformed into a promise of safety and belonging. That night, the house was quiet. A profound sense of peace had settled over Hale Creek. In their room, lit by a single lamp, Maeve and Jesse tended to the lingering marks of their struggle. The wedding had been beautiful, but the reality of their life was written on their hands. They bathed not in a fancy tub, but with a basin of warm water mixed with fragrant sage ash, a simple cleanser for the dust and sweat of the day. Afterward, Maeve took a small tin of saddle grease, the same balm Tio Abel used to keep the leather soft and supple. She took Jesse's hands in hers. They were strong, calloused, the knuckles scarred from a lifetime of hard labor. She gently, methodically, worked the grease into the chapped skin and the small, cracked cuts, her touch a silent act of devotion and care. He watched her, his heart full of a quiet wonder he could not put into words. When she was done, he took the tin and did the same for her. Her hands were smaller, but no less marked by work. He tended to a blister on her palm from the bucket brigade during the fire, a rope burn on her finger from the flood. They did not speak of the violence or the fear. They spoke of the future through their silent, gentle touch, healing the wounds of the past. Later, lying in the darkness, with the sound of the creek whispering outside their window, Maeve rested her head on his chest. He could feel the steady, strong beat of her heart. She whispered into the quiet of the room, her voice barely audible. "If God is kind, perhaps next year there will be another child to hear the water." Jesse held her closer, his hand resting protectively on her stomach. He did not need to answer. His touch, his presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, all of it was a promise. Here, in this hard, beautiful land, they would grow a family. The following spring, the valley was transformed. The network of canals Jesse had designed worked better than anyone had dared to hope. The pastures were green, and the small homesteads that had been on the brink of failure were now thriving. The water, shared freely, had washed away old rivalries and nourished a new sense of community. The old, fire-damaged hay barn at Hale Creek found a new purpose. With the help of a surprisingly enthusiastic Velma Kate, Maeve had cleaned it out and fixed it up. They had turned it into a shelter, a temporary refuge for women who found themselves alone and in trouble on the frontier, a place to rest and regroup without judgment. It was the first of its kind in the territory, a testament to two women who knew what it was like to be on the outside, looking in. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the ranch. A single, clear note rang out. It was Finn, standing on the porch, blowing his brass whistle. It was not a shrill cry for help, but a clear, happy call. A call home, and from the fields, from the barn, from the house, his family came, drawn together by the sound, ready for supper. Thank you so much for listening to our story tonight. We would love for you to comment where you are listening from, so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And please subscribe to our channel Wild West Night, like this video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.